panel today. My name is Akosia Annabelle. I'm from AB 2020. Essentially, we're a communications and digital media company that we produce newsletters, monthly insightful ones about the Africa space generally, and also offline connect investors and businesses and entrepreneurs in that space. But I'm sure you can at us and have a look. So as mentioned, today we're going to be talking about bridging the Africa tech funding gap, and it's a funny one because a lot of conversation around lack of investment going into the startup community, and then also a lot of conversation around the lack of investable opportunities. We're going to try and get to the bottom of this narrative and see which of them are true or not. Joining me today to have this conversation, we've got to my left, and I'll go all the way down, Will Tyndall, who's the co-founder of Emerging Crowd. We've got Sean Obide, who's a founder of New Gen Angels. Also, Dotun Oloporoku, sorry, we had a little spelling mistake up there, so I've just learnt it. Partner at Starter, and also Ben White, who's founder of the Venture Capital for Africa. So Africa Tech startups received a total amount of funding in excess of $106 million roughly in 2005, according to Disrupt Africa's Africa Tech funding report. And also VC for Africa, which connects African startups to global investors, found that capital invested through their platform more than doubled between 2014 and 2015, from 12 million US to 26.9 million US dollars. So it sounds promising, but what we're finding is that a lot of the investments in Africa are focused on later stage opportunities, which is resulting in a funding gap, particularly for startups at the seed and early growth stage. So Ben, I'm going to start with you on this one. The capital investment doubled on your platform between 2014 and 2015. Give us some insight into that. What's happening on VC for Africa?
So VC for Africa is a global network. We have 30,000 members in 159 countries, and we track 5,000 startups in 46 African markets. And we ask the startups, tell us how you're performing, and we can help benchmark you against your peers. So startups can get a sense of where they are in comparison to the companies that they compete with. At the same time, we as an organization can then say something about the trends that we're seeing emerging across sort of, the startup African investment space. So we have actually new data. The data that you're referencing is from the previous year. We've now benchmarked 224 countries that have raised 73 million. That's across 104 transactions across 26 African markets. And what we're seeing is basically across all of sort of the main KPIs that we track as an organization, that the companies are performing better over time. Whether you're looking at their revenue, whether you're looking at the number of people that they employ, or if you're looking at the amount of capital that they're able to raise from the investment community, we're seeing basically progress across all fronts.
So from your perspective, the capital's definitely there.
It's never enough. I think if you ask an entrepreneur, how is it to be out there in this market fundraising? It's very difficult, and certainly there are new types of capital and new types of investors needed to really, I think, strengthen the ecosystem and make it more sustainable long term. But there's definitely more capital available today than there has ever been before.
Definitely. And Dotun, I'll come to you because you work with a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of startups. You're familiar with that space. Can you give us an idea as to what the early stage startups are saying when it comes to capital? Are you finding it that they are finding it quite difficult? And if so, what are the difficulties that they're finding?
First of all, I'll just talk about Starter. Starter is a platform that enables Africans to build agro-business. We're looking at the ecosystem as a whole, and we're asking the questions that we know that Africa is going to grow. We know that billion-dollar businesses will be built in Africa by Africans because of the demographics, because of some of the things that were just said recently. And what we want to do is to help people that want to build those kind of businesses using technology. So to answer your question directly, like Ben said, most entrepreneurs will say that they don't have the cash yet, especially the early stage, the what you call pre-seed here, but pre-Series A. There's no difference between Series A and seed in Africa. It's just people need money.
We just need some money.
And most of the startups need it. However,
And when you say seed, so can you give us an example of like the type of money that you're talking about? Because earlier on we heard like $500.
so
you mentioned.
you can run a very good startup, technology startup in Africa with $5,000.
Okay.
Okay, that doesn't mean they're going to be profitable. You can make a difference with $5,000, right? So here, that's like, what's that? Because I do invest in companies in the UK, but that's no money. But in Africa, it can make a bit of difference. They can prove their business model, they can build their MVP, and they can actually prove whether they're going to survive or not with that $5,000. However, one of the main things that I observe in the ecosystem is not as much as lack of funding available, but lack of expertise. And the expertise is not about the fact that there are no talented Africans. It's just the expertise of how to build agro-business is lacking. Not a lot of African entrepreneurs know how to use technology to grow really fast. And most of the successful businesses have been built by Africans in the diaspora that come back home. Because you can easily get knowledge about how to build a business here in the UK just for a part of a coffee. I can go to Google campus and meet with very good founders just over coffee, and they will tell me how to build their business, and I can use that. But in Africa, it's not.
Yeah, no, but to know, you need to be educated or you need to have some experience, and the startups in Africa are not getting that. So what do you think needs to be done, or how can that change, or is it changing, or is that issue being addressed in any way?
There are two things that need to go hand in hand. One is the education, and the other one is the funding. So African startups need funding. But before they fund, so most of the investors there will say that you invest in people, so you want confidence in the person you're investing in and the ability for them to execute against the vision they're giving to you. To do that, they need to be educated. So a lot of work has been done by some of the hubs in Africa, teaching people how to build a business, rather than just coming up with competition and demo and pitch events. It's just teaching them, how do you build a business? How do you acquire users? How do you build a team? How do you use technology to grow faster? How do you build your MVP? And what are those rudimentary things that you need? And also, how do you handle failure? How do you take risk? And how does a startup founder who failed now go to the next one and build a team and run with that? And those things need to be done more. There needs to be I'll sound selfish here, but there needs to be more starter, like what we're doing, helping, teaching, doing masterclass, doing training, doing events, and not this kind of event where we have people like me and Ben and just talking heads, but teaching, actually going out there and teaching people what they need to do and and working with them. And staying with them on their business and helping them that way.
Great, I'm sure we're going to come back to that. But Sean, wouldn't you say, but failure's good? The likes of Andela, for example, right? I'm sure that before they became what they are today, they were failures beforehand, yes?
Absolutely. I mean, sorry, good afternoon, everyone. First of all, thanks very much, everyone, that come here. It looks like Africa is definitely getting traction. Just to introduce myself, I'm Sean Obedi and also work with startups. I've been in the space for about 5 years. And when it comes to Africa, especially selling Africa in London, yes, having failures matter, but also we also see some success. So because everybody's basically trying to buy into Africa, but we need some tangibles. So in terms of like companies that we're seeing, like Andera, for example, Andera was the third actually iteration in terms of what he actually ended up doing. So the actual company started off with a few friends who were in Canada and started something called Fora. And Fora is what became basically Andela. But the experience that you go through when you're creating a company is nothing that is not, you can't run that from anywhere else. So you have to do it practically. But also people that have the knowledge need to be open with the knowledge, because the people that are here, we are all building on an existing ecosystem. Yeah. When it comes to Africa, we still need to build those ecosystems. Everything like the startups need their own ecosystem built, but also the investing side also needs to be built. So if you look at the NGOs, if you look at basically anybody who's in early stage investing, they are all part of building the whole ecosystem as we speak. Yeah. So we need to see failures, and failures will be there. The guys at 8 miles per hour have actually done quite a bit of that. But sometimes when investing, you also need to see some returns. And we're glad that some people actually are now starting to see some sort of returns coming from African companies. Then it's easier to get people like Mark Zuckerberg interested in putting some money in African companies. And that's huge for the ecosystem.
Can I just add something to that, what Sean just said? I think failure normally calcify the tech ecosystem. Every tech ecosystem has been mature, like Silicon Valley or even London, be built on the back of some companies that have failed and then learn from that. I don't know how many investors are here, but if you want to invest in Africa, you need to play the long game. And you need to identify the fact that there will be failures, and if you want to build the ecosystem, you must get ready for that. And don't just invest in the opportunity, and that's good stories that we hear about Africa. Invest in people. Investing in a founder that you believe can do the long work. And my failing is first business, like Inye did, but use that to build a massive business. And then follow that person through. And people like Pule, who invested in Inye. Inye is the founder of Andela, which raised $24 million last month. Like they announced that they raised $24 million last month. Pule invested in Inye as a person. But and Inye went on to build first business, failed, and then next one. So I think having that mindset will help, rather than just having this nice brochure, oh, Africa is great, it's Africa rising, and then going to it without having an understanding.
Will, I want to bring you in at this point and tell us a little bit about emerging crowd, because it's a little bit different to that, isn't it? Because I don't think your investors actually meet the person that they're funding in, do they, until after you've kind of introduced them? How does it work?
Yeah, so Emerging Crowd is set up as a transactional platform. So the idea is that really we're looking to attract new sources of capital that aren't necessarily on the continent at the moment. So a lot of what Doton was talking about earlier on in terms of the capacity gap that exists, it's not necessarily, well, I don't think anyone's in doubt in terms of the initiatives, in terms of some of the exciting companies that are coming out of the continent at the moment. Where there's a big shortfall at the moment is just general governance. It's boring stuff, but it's necessary for investors, new investors to come in. It's the simple skills such as financial modelling. It's the ability to go through institutional sort of due diligence, and that's really where you start to open up completely new sources of capital. That's a super exciting thing. I mean, it just shows, going back to the Andela thing, you know, it's the appetite for Africa is definitely there. It's the first investment by Chan Zuckerberg, and it's a meaningful investment. It's a huge investment. Yeah, so it's there. Everyone knows about the opportunity, but the companies have got to be ready, and that's what we're trying to do. So yeah.
So a lot of what you're saying, I want to bring Ben you back into the conversation at this point. A lot of what's being said seems to be based very much from the Silicon Valley type model. Do you think that a different model might be needed when it comes to investment in Africa?
I think every ecosystem has its own growth path to follow, and it doesn't really make sense to try and copy stuff. But you know, our friends in Cameroon, they claim Silicon Mountain. They've built Boya as a tech hub at the foot of Mount Cameroon, and it's an absolutely amazing, inspiring place, just absolutely overflowing with talent. And they last week organized the first annual tech conference, where they're bringing together their community and the stakeholders, and they're creating visibility for themselves. They're engaging with their stakeholders. They're getting government and mobile operators involved, and they're talking about how to build really great transformative companies for Cameroon that will have relevance not only for that country, but for Nigeria and for potentially many other markets. And that, I think that's how, you know, this is sort of coming online across the continent.
And is that driving investors to it?
Absolutely. I mean, investors go where there are opportunities. We've seen a growing number of companies get picked up, you know, from the MEST program going into 500 startups. We've seen Techstars open up in South Africa. We've seen Bloomberg. Other organizations were running a Pan-African challenge for Thomson Reuters at the moment. You know, all of these players come in when they see that there's a strong ecosystem, that entrepreneurs have organized themselves that individuals have stood up within these communities and said, this is who we are, this is what we want to be doing, and this is what we need. And then investors are going to be relevant or completely irrelevant for that conversation. I think one of the big sort of exciting things that we see happening at the moment is really the emergence of the local African business angel. So professionals who have already had successful careers across the continent now, sort of, coming to this realization that they're sitting next to all of this fantastic talent and wanting to be involved in that story, not with, just their money, but also really because they have experience, they have knowledge, they have network, they have all of this other, asset that they can bring to the table. And I think this is also where we start to address some of these gaps where there might be a lack of experience, where founders might need a little bit of hand-holding, they might need to understand what governance is about, and really try and help these companies grow and scale so that they become great investable opportunities.
Yeah, fantastic.
Do you think there is a place for maybe some of the investors here to probably look at partnering or forming a syndicate with investors on the ground in Africa? Do you think?
I would go even further. I mean, maybe it's not even possible for somebody here to invest in Zimbabwe if they don't have local partners. And that's where also, to some extent, everyone has, so there's not a lot of patience. Nobody has any patience. And there's a good reason for that. Maybe because we all sort of realize that we don't have a lot of time. There's a huge sense of urgency. At the same time, the reality is that we can't skip steps. We have to build it piece by piece. And if you want to talk about doing business, if you want to talk about investing, it's about having relationships and people that you trust. Those networks have to be established. And in doing that sort of real mundane, nitty-gritty work, you're actually taking opportunities and with the right linkages, you're turning them into actionable investments. So syndications, cross-border investing, linking up angel networks, collaborating with European groups, American groups. This is all really critical stuff.
Excellent. And Sean, I think it only makes sense to bring you in right now for the New Gen Angels. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the New Gen Angels as well, so people know?
Sure. So New Gen Angels is basically an angel investment club, and we focus on African opportunities. And we happen to be basically focusing on the diaspora, so to speak. That's number one, because there's a lot of money in this room, but how many of you have invested? We need you to send checks. So, so there's basically what kind of build up on that. Yes, there's a lot of interest and there's a lot of a lot of things to be said about Africa. But once again, things are working because some people have done some initial work. If you look at Kenya, for example, everybody that is now building on top of M-Pesa, nobody has to worry about money, financial transactions. So there's some sort of building blocks that you have to put in place in terms of if you really want everybody to rise together. And that's what you've seen, with ecosystems that are kind of growing community-wise. You've got Yaba in Nigeria, you've got Nairobi, of course, and Cameroon, and people like Kigali as well are also trying to do other things in Kigali and Rwanda. All these drone stuff that everybody keeps talking about, the real work is actually going on in K-Lab, because the drone stuff is just the policy stuff. It's good for PR, but at the same time, if you look at the real tangibles in terms of making a local impact, it's not going to be as huge impact as actually empowering young people to learn how to code, actually trying to kind of develop companies. But in terms of what we do as New Gen Angels, basically we're kind of building a network here in London of people that are ready to sign checks, angel investing checks into African opportunities, and really looking at companies that are kind of are moving beyond the original borders. So an example of, once again, Andela. Andela is now becoming an international company. They've only raised $24 million. So in a few years' time, they'll be raising more. By the time they get to 50, I think we'll all be singing. But there's an opportunity to actually keep raising and building, keep raising more money and keep raising this money. In order to raise this money, you actually need some sort of networks. So I don't think it's a good thing that Africans who are in diaspora are missing out on these opportunities, simply because we are not organized. If we had angel networks, if we had VC funds that we all invest into, then perhaps we'd be just kind of reaping some of these rewards. So we need to build, once again, clubs, investment platforms, but we also need to kind of really serve the market that is there and inform people. And I'm glad Tommy is here because Tommy is leading what is now the largest group of groups in terms of the networks that are kind of coming up across Africa, and they're hoping to create more.
Fantastic. So just by show of hands, how many people here have invested in more than 2 African private companies?
How did you guys do it? Maybe one person can answer.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I'm advising pension funds, so we find funds, so the private equity funds, and then they have large deals that are too big for their funds, and so they come to us and say, we want to do a little bit more. Would you like access to this particular deal? Yeah. So a couple of examples people probably heard of is IHS Towers and Libstar food manufacturers and so on.
And so what sort of size deals are they?
Well, IHS is a $5.5 billion dollar company, so it's a big deal. We put $50 million to work in that. It's a tiny amount as a portion, but $50 million is a lot for anyone. And anything down from that.
So it's fair to say you'd have like a suite of advisors to help you structure everything, to do the DD on the ground.
Yeah, so we rely on the private equity managers to do
Yeah.
the DD, and then we spot check that and review that and meet the companies to make sure that everything is as I say it is.
And what about, has anyone invested sort of smaller amounts, so sort of sub $1 million in smaller companies? Yes, have you done that?
Through essentially angel network. So basically, a bit of bootstrapping, co-bootstrapping, angel network, very informal and structured.
Yeah.
So I think this is like half the problem is we're not really touching the surface. Even though there's been, I think Ben, you were saying 70 million invested through the platform, it's still in terms of early stage companies, particularly tech companies, because people don't know necessarily all the intricacies of doing deals in all these different countries within sub-Saharan Africa. It's very hard for somebody truly to access these opportunities in any way that is through a regulated platform, in any sort of with any kind of investor protection. So things such as preemption rights, tag-along rights, voting, any representation on the board. It's pretty tricky. And when you're starting to talk about small deals, it just becomes very expensive and often uncommercial to even attempt to do it. So with a group of guys who's obviously into Africa, it's amazing how few have actually invested in these types of companies.
I must say, more hands went up than I expected. I'm going to take some questions from the audience, and I want to talk this one at Dotton, actually. Should more be done to enable and encourage Africans in Africa to invest in African startups and keep ecosystem and value on the continent?
You know the answer to that question. No, I'm biased. I would say yes, absolutely yes. The question is, how do we encourage them, actually, when it is easier for an African, especially maybe Nigerian investor to invest in real estate or oil, because they're going to get return on their investment faster than technology. So how do we encourage them to see technology business or high growth angel investable businesses as they want to go for? You blackmail them into doing that. From what Andela said, Mark Zuckerberg invested in Andela said, can you see that? And you're African and you're putting your money in government's bond. Why not put it in stuff like this? No, that's number one. Number two, you do what ABAN or LAN in Lagos is doing, which is educating the investors and building a community of investors, of high net worth individuals, and saying you can put your money into startups. And it's not just about the return you're going to get, which is part of it, but it's about helping the next generation of business leaders. Because these guys are going to be the next business leaders of tomorrow. Do you want to be part of what they're doing? So I think that is the main question that we should be tackling. And how do we encourage high net worth individuals to invest in startups in Africa?
But is there a trend, or can you see perhaps African organisations in Africa or companies in Africa, using some of the money off their balance sheets and get corporate responsibility and all that kicking in at some point? Sean, do you reckon?
I hope so. I know that first of all, once again, talking about corporate venture capital, there's a need for corporate venture capital as more startups are now pretty much kind of trying to attack the markets that most of these companies occupy. It makes sense to start investing in them. So the structure for corporate venture capital is where a large kind of company invests directly into a startup and they kind of adopt it basically.
Yeah.
And they give
Or
them
acquire
access.
them.
Exactly, acquire them, which is what you've done.
I think that's something we try to do. So I organize events in Lagos on a bi-monthly basis, which is it's called Silicon Drink Up, and we're trying to organize it.
We need a new word. I
Silicon
think, for
Drink Up,
Africa.
yeah. So we Silicon Drink Up Lagos, and we're trying to organize in every African country that's got mature ecosystem. And the idea is to bring startups with investors and corporates. Just be in a room, just chat, have a drink, no speech, no program, just talk. And hopefully there will be that synergy happening. But talking about corporate venture investment, we've seen AXA done something with AIG recently. And we've seen MTN as well done that with AIG. Maybe there's a good trend there when you see big companies doing that. There might be some other companies trying to follow the trend over time. It's not a culture in Africa for corporates to be investing in risky startups. It might be something that they have to adopt over time.
Yeah. I know, just briefly, I know there's definitely somebody in this room who's working on something, on that particular issue of helping companies to invest locally, because these companies that are investing in Africa, they're all multinationals. So we need to see African companies starting to use corporate venture capital to invest in their local ecosystems.
Okay. Another question from the audience. What are the best deals that the individuals on the panel have done or been involved in? Ben, I'll start with you, and then we'll go down the line. Can you give us an example?
I've spent most of my time actually focused on ecosystem building type organizations. So ABAN is African Business Angels Network, is a Pan-African nonprofit association. Another organization we've spent a lot of time on is AfriLabs, which is also a Pan-African network of innovation hubs. There are now some 200 innovation spaces across the continent, and these organizations come together as also part of a federated network. And spend a lot of hours with VC for Africa trying to help entrepreneurs find the resources that they need so that they can grow their businesses. So that's the bulk of my focus.
That's loads. Thanks, Ben. Dotun?
The recent investment I've done personally is Zazu, and Zazu is you know about Zazu?
Someone went,
it's a very
"Ooh."
interesting startup. Yeah, Pasios, I'm actually signing the document in a few hours, so send it to me. And it's actually connecting rural farmers in Zimbabwe directly with the retailers using not smart, they're using dumb phone. I said farmers can count, they can use dumb phone, feature phone, and they can connect directly and sell to the retailers in Harare. It's very interesting startups. I love what they're doing. But one of the startups that got me excited recently, which I think the ticket size is higher than what I can do, because my wife will not allow me to do that big ticket size, is Paystack. Paystack is building Stripe of Africa. It's starting from Nigeria. They just recently got to Y Combinator, and they're back in Lagos. It's exciting what they're doing. I love it. And it's just great. And some of the startup that comes my way, it's just, I love what people are doing in Africa. It's just, I need to say this. I think in Africa, you see problems that needs to be solved everywhere, and entrepreneurs are solving that. They're trying to solve it. In London, you see technology looking for problem. So you see startup with some technology looking for problem. When Africa is the other way around, so it's just exciting.
Sounds like a marriage made in heaven. Sean?
For me, I don't have any particular one because I work with quite a few people, but I just basically want to also highlight that it's not just about tech. There are also companies that are doing great stuff in other areas, like Africa-inspired stuff like Okun Beachwear, which is a company we've featured in most of our events. We also run dinners. Sometimes you all can come. So there's quite a lot going on behind the scenes in terms of trying to connect, some people here. There's Instabag, which is actually based in Cairo. That was also raised money from Axel.
Okay.
There is, of course, Andela, which I worked on behind the scenes. But there is quite a few people that are doing interesting stuff, and more deals going to be announced quite soon as well.
Fabulous. And Will, one of your favourite deals you've worked on?
I think as a sector, rather than individual deals, again, because we work with quite a lot of companies, it's nicer not to individual companies. I think probably, I mean, just fintech, I'm probably pretty biased, but it's something that I'm super excited about. It's already been proven with obviously M-Cobra and M-Pesa and everybody else sort of related. But there's actually some related sectors that are just starting to sort of come and get some traction, particularly on like the credit scoring side. I think that's super exciting in terms of just bringing everyday banking or effectively everyday banking to a completely new sort of demographic.
Fantastic. And do you think, just generally, and anyone can answer this, we're going to see more of a trend towards impact investing in this space, whereby it's going to be about the impact as much as it is about the return?
Yeah, impact is huge business, so yes.
I think on the impact side, it's impact is almost starting to lead over the DFIs, which is kind of crazy. So DFIs are set up to drive, to drive these ecosystems, to drive sort of young businesses. But in fact, their demands on sort of internal rates of return are crazy. They've got this whole like sort of demonstration effect where they've got to bring in other people alongside the DFI, and they're always accountable to everybody else, to the host countries. Whereas the impact guys actually have got much more patient capital. They can take a longer term view. They demand less. It's typically 10 to 15% IRR. And it's growing at such a fast rate, particularly with the likes of, the Chan Zuckerbergs of the world. It's super exciting, and I think the sooner proper retail everyday investors get involved in impact investing, it's going to be huge.
Big. Ben?
We take a slightly different approach. We think entrepreneurship is a badge that you have to earn. Entrepreneurs inherently they exist in the world to solve problems and to make the world a better place. And they do that through entrepreneurship by building great companies that make good money. So we would rather focus on building an ethos of quality entrepreneurship as opposed to sort of making a difference between good entrepreneurs and bad entrepreneurs. I mean, if you're an entrepreneur and you're not, you should be called an opportunist, or we should give you a different label. That would be our position.
I agree with Ben on that, because there's so much talk about impact investment that looks a bit like charity to me sometimes when you push it too much. And it's investing in entrepreneurs, and Africans are entrepreneurial. You can make impact. You can make a difference. You can change people's lives through that. But the primary goal is solving problem using enterprise.
Fantastic.
Just quickly, basically, what happened was the world has changed. The money that is going into impact is what used to go into aid. So everybody that used to do aid doesn't want to do aid anymore, and they want to do impact. Now, if you're a company in Africa that want to raise money, you have to show you're doing impact. If you're not doing impact, actually nobody's going to give you any money, because those who have money to invest and quite invest for a long time, they get some impact funds, and quite a few of these kind of springing up. So people have to be kind of careful, not just design businesses in order to get funding, because I've seen that. So we need to have people addressing real problems, because if you do that, then there's a chance of getting funding.
Fantastic. So just to wrap up, off the back of something, Ben, that you said earlier about, going through a slow process, the whole thing kind of, we have to do it bit by bit, piece by piece. And there's an African proverb that says you must eat the elephant one bite at a time. So on that premise, I'm going to ask you each, just as a takeaway, instead of me wrapping up, just to give us sort of what would the next bite be, if you like, if to be able to close that funding gap? What would you say needs to be done, each of you in the industry, you can go away with?
So the idea that really excites me, and if you want to talk about when the ecosystem is sustainable, it's actually when the entrepreneurs now have gone boom or bust, and they then come back to the table, having lived the startup journey in the African context where they're living and working, really sort of inherently understanding the next generation of entrepreneurs coming up and feeling an obligation to be involved. And that's when you will have, a critical mass that really, sort of brings the entire system full circle.
Fantastic. Dalton?
I'll add to that by saying that I think one of the big things that will change the game is Africans looking into the community, looking into the problems that they face and internalizing it and seeing what can be What can they build locally using technology to solve that problem, rather than looking at what has been done in Europe and can we translate that to Africa? But looking at the problems that we have, like what Zazu is doing, using feature phone to solve problems that is very unique to Africa. And that would be the big thing that will happen. The other thing I will add is so Africa is a huge continent, right? We can trade with ourselves, right? Nigerian entrepreneurs need to see beyond Nigeria and see how can they run a business that we trade in Cameroon and go to Senegal and Ghana and stuff like that.
Great. Sean?
I would say we need people to sign checks. Honestly, I
It's true,
do,
that would close the gap.
because we're buying a lot of Porsches and Land Rovers and building large houses, but not really investing in companies, and that really hurts me. So we just need to basically people to start changing attitudes and just writing checks.
Fantastic. And Will?
I think the sort of capital plus model, so filling the gaps, the capacity gaps, offering, supporting, providing governance, providing financial modelling, and allowing these great companies to source new areas of capital.
Brilliant. My panel, everyone, fantastic. Please follow them, support them. Amakosi, you've been a great audience. Thanks very much.